Now, I just want to, before we get into the talk, there are no frameworks here. It's going to be a personal journey. But as the only European speaker, and I think the last guest speaker today, you guys in America have done an amazing job and set the bar so high. So guys at DSCAR, thank you so much. I specifically asked to go early on because I knew you were going to be absolutely kick-ass, and they gave me the last slot. So I've been on a knife edge for days, but guys, seriously great stuff. Right, so let's click on. We're going to talk about creator mode. And yes, it's a bit of a riff on founder mode. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that term. It was by design, not by accident. So we've had so many amazing provocations, thoughts, reflections, discussions. Guys, we had an amazing talk last night at dinner along these lines. But I think one that stood out when we were prepping for this was Lyric's question, will the future be designed with intention or by accident? And this, for me, is such a critical question, particularly how are we going to get there? Who's responsible? Now, for me, it's up to all of us in the room, beyond design and research, of course, but I think we have a particular unique opportunity to figure out how we can design. And it depends on how all of us in this room show up today. For years, and I think we've discussed this until the cows have come home over dinner and breakfast and coffees, is this sense that we need to work hard to build a profile of design and research. And yes, all of us in the room have done that for the last 5, 10, 20 years. And we've done a good job. But it came to me at what cost? Has there been a cost at getting ourselves in those rooms alongside product and engineering and marketing that could erode us, take us back from the craft, the work that actually fuels us? And the reality is, whilst all of us are now in those rooms, we're now working with great folks like Michael, the executives, right? Which is, I have to say, I love being in those spaces. The reality is, the big work, the meaningful work that really moves the needle isn't just happening there. It's been on the cold face, understanding our consumers, the technology, and staying close to the craft and material. An amazing reference we heard yesterday in this particular time. And beyond that, it's this connection to humanity and having a sense of taste and sensibility in the work that is obviously so important as I think we face into this age, this decade of AI ahead. Now, the problem for me has been, looking back at myself and other folks that I've worked with over the last 10, 15 years, is when we lose sight of that, when we lose that connection, that proximity to our teams, to the craft, and to the people, we lose something really important, something that's a critical thing that defines who we are and drives us as professionals. Well, at least it happened to me, and in quite a significant but slow way. There we go. So one evening, I find myself, like many of you have discussed the last couple of days, sitting in front of my MacBook. I've managed to close out 15 calls, and I'm not exaggerating, I was documenting this for 6 weeks, 15 calls, which was quite an achievement. And I'm doom scrolling through emails, endless emails, and it dawns me that this is not an exceptional day. This has become my norm. And it has been weeks, perhaps months, since I've actually created something, connected with a consumer, or done anything bar sit on video calls and answer emails. And whilst I sit there and reflect, it's not just fatigue, or in Graham and my case, a bit of jet lag we've had the last couple of days. It's a sense of loss. A loss for having creativity in my life, for spending time with the folks, aka you guys in a room, on subjects that are dear to my heart. And I realized that there's this paradox in leadership, a trade-off. As all of us move up the food chain, as we develop our profiles, we take on greater responsibility and greater roles. We trade off that time in the work, in the detail. We end up swapping often our time for management convention. We delegate, we adapt, we step away from the work that got us into the industry to start with. And we swap creation for coordination, shaping for scheduling, and making for managing. And the question dawned on me, what if it could be different? What if we didn't need to make that trade-off? What if we could both guide and create as leaders? So as I'm sitting there with my head in my hands, to be honest with you, I'm trying to work out, was there a specific moment in time? Was there a gear shift? And the reality was it was a subtle erosion as I had taken on more and grown my team. And tried to do all the great things that we read about in managerial books and leadership books. There was no specific key moment, but there was an element I could sort of reflect on. It happened when I moved from working in agencies and startups. I'd spent 5 to 8 years working with teams that were experimental and fast-paced and want to take risk, and I'd taken on a role in an enterprise business. I'm sure I've heard a lot of you guys talk about this shift as well in the last couple of days. Now, the opportunity was epic, right? I had a bigger team, bigger opportunities, a bigger pay packet, which doesn't hurt either. But the reality was there was such a cultural difference. And I moved from this space where I could be reactive and experimental and playful into a space that was considered and structured and methodical. But with all of this opportunity came a subtle expectation to step away from the craft. And I had, without noticing it, swapped the doing for talking about doing. But after that evening, that moment of clarity and recognition, I decided to be a bit of a rebel child that I was and push back on my calendar. So I nuked it, and I took the opportunity to jump into a creative workshop with my team. The walls were covered in sketches and post-it notes. We had some folks dialing in from our offshore teams. Prototypes ran on the MacBooks and on the phones. And first I sit there, I observe, I listen to what's going on. And then rather selfishly, I pick up a marker, I jump in, I start talking with people, and it dawns me, this is the work that I really want to do. And this is actually where the team needs me to lead. Not spending time managing up in update meetings, but being present. And to look at Lyric's question, this was designing a future with intention. But my revolt, my pushback against the enterprise norm, well, it was met with some challenge, and it was met with some doubt. I find myself back in a management meeting, and you guys know this better than I, right? But I've sat around, we're doing our usual updates, capacity, blockers, hey, is that thing going okay? And it came to my turn, and I was lit up. I was really excited about the work that I was doing with the team, and so I decided to go off script. So I start explaining this proposition we've been working on, and start putting up some prototypes. Something changed. The energy in the room, it shifted. Was it surprise? I think in reality, it was a bit of disappointment. I was doing something that was very unfamiliar to the group. And a colleague turned to me and said, this seems a bit in the detail for someone in your role. Now, for a moment, it hit me hard. I stepped back. I questioned myself. Was I doing myself a disservice as a leader? Was I damaging my profile? Perhaps I came across as a manager that simply couldn't let go of the work. And it wasn't the first time I'd felt this tension. In my organization, managers were managers of people. They weren't people who were spending time in their professional crafts. But I knew in my heart that this approach, this posture of leadership had worked in the past. And I was determined that I could make it work again. But I realized I couldn't just talk about design leadership. I had to codify it, perhaps even brand it. And that's when I started talking about this approach as creator mode, a posture where leading and creativity are deeply intertwined together. So when I stepped back into creator mode, and really I was doing it for me and for my team, things started to shift. Projects that were stalling started to move forward. We were having honest, authentic discussions. We scrapped the religious hour-long design reviews that happen every 2-3 days. And we started to have organic cycle discussions. I was in Figma files, I was on D-Scout, of course, playing with the tools, speaking with our customers, and actually spending a bunch of time with the folks that fueled me, which is you guys in the room. What was great was that this attitudinal change, this repositioning, didn't just benefit me and the team. Stakeholders started to get involved. They looked at what we were doing and thought, hey, that's fun. Can we get involved? So they started joining us for workshops, contributing to questions. And for the first time, I closed out the week feeling motivated and inspired that we could actually change things in the business. What was more surprising is that within a couple of weeks of this slight gear change in mindset, a bit of a nuke on the management side of things, was that we got noticed by the SLT. Now, the SLT had typically worked with long-term proposition and innovation work being outsourced to creative agencies, something that I really didn't love. But because they were hearing this relatively positive feedback, I would say, from colleagues in the product function, because they were excited, they were curious, they asked us to step in. So we took on this long-term project for the first time in the design team's history to look at a 3-year, multi-year roadmap. We didn't only just start to play with prototypes and deliver on the pitch decks, we went further. We ran a whole bunch of call internally. We engaged a network of strategic researchers to bolster where we didn't have capacity. We said, hey, how do we build a story? How do we tell what the consumer vision is? It could just be slideware. What if we did film? So we started a production line as well within the team. All of this manifested to the point that we were able to help unlock north of 20 million in capital allocation because we were in the work, and the whole product team were in the work as well. It was conversational. Now, this was wonderful for the team because it didn't just drive the change in terms of what the product team was seeing. We'd proven that we could do something new, so we unlocked new investment, new capabilities, and new tools. And we went from a team that just does the BAU, picked up tickets in Jira, to leading strategic decisions for the entire organization. And this is the deeper value of operating in creator mode. It isn't necessarily new. It's just going back to what all of us built our careers on to start with. It unlocks creative confidence in ourselves and consequently our teams, but also it inspires the wider organization. Now, I have to say, I fully admit, I am not the first designer, researcher, person in our organizations or in this industry to ever think like this. I'm sure there are folks in this room who think and have operated in the same way. But 2 people stood out to me. So a few years ago, I connected with one of my design heroes, a chap called Gadi Amit. He was the design visionary behind Fitbit's early success and founder of a company called New Deal Design. Now, Gadi, a bit like me, had built up his career, and on paper, it looked fantastic. But he realized that he was spending all the time in meetings and delegating all the fun work to his team. So he took a really radical choice to step away. And for the last 25 years, he's been building some of the most iconic consumer products. More recently, of course, I came across, like I'm sure many in this room, Seamless Click, wonderful. Paul Graham's essay on founder mode, inspired by, of course, Brian Chesky's infamous talk at Y Combinator. As Graham described it, Chesky followed the conventional wisdom as a leader. He hired great people, stepped back, delegated. And as Graham articulated it, that the results were ultimately disastrous for Airbnb. So Brian took a very radical decision to step back into the work. He engaged with product, essentially made himself the CPO, but the results were impressive. They reignited the mission, and they drove huge success. And we all know, of course, how well Airbnb is doing today. And there's a very simple and clear lesson that I'd like us to reflect on. When leaders lead in, we all win. And it goes to every industry and discipline, but particularly in this room, for the folks who can help shape and create product and connect it back to the humanity and the consumers at the far end, there is a real opportunity for us. Now, there is an imperative time, and had I known that you guys wouldn't answer so many parts of this, I might have tweaked my talk a fraction, but I will continue where I were. So obviously now we're into this age of AI. And I would say this matters now perhaps more than it has done, at least in my time in the industry. We're seeing huge fluctuations and changes because of economics and technology. And it's forcing leadership teams to rethink the structures. At least in Europe and the UK, we're seeing teams get leaner, smaller, leadership roles flatten out dramatically. And of course, all of us have discussed in the last couple of days expecting to do more with less because of AI. So leadership for me cannot afford to sit in management mode. It cannot afford to sit on operations. Of course, we need to enable our teams, but we need to inspire and lead and drive innovation. More importantly, whilst AI is going to, and is already, driving huge amounts of efficiency and gains, and TBC to exactly where it lands, I think it's human judgment, taste, and connection that this team, this group of people in the room will really bring, that separates businesses and will ultimately allow us to win and succeed. So, back to creator mode. If you ever find yourself disconnected, feeling that sense of loss or fatigue, I would encourage you to ask yourself, perhaps it's the time to step back, Step back into the work, rebuild that proximity with your team, that connection with your customers. Find opportunity and space. We've heard about carving out time this morning to really get back to what fuels you. And to shake off this traditional sense of management convention, to not look at being close to the work as a step backwards, but a leap forwards for your business, your team, and ultimately for you. And that's what I'm calling creator mode. Thanks, guys.